Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Charter School Marketplace. I am Paul Norcross, and I would like to introduce you to Ashley Baquero, who is the Director of the Office of Charter Schools of the Department of Public Instruction in North Carolina. And I am just going to go ahead and ask you to give us a brief story from birth until today of your life, of your past. If you could just share.
That's a long time. Okay. Well, let's see. I grew up in Florida for the most part. We moved around a lot.
Which part? Orlando or?
No, wow. My parents both worked for Piper Aircraft.
Oh, cool.
So I was actually born in Santa Maria, California. And they used to, my father was a pilot, and he used to transfer the planes from Santa Maria to Vero Beach, where they had a factory. So I spent a lot more time actually in like really small prop planes when I was like in a car seat.
Can you fly? Do you have your pilot's license?
No. I actually I'm not scared of flying, but it's not something I enjoy. Which is interesting since I spent so much time in planes as a kid. But so we lived in Vero Beach, Melbourne, and then I consider Gainesville, Florida, primarily home. I spent like middle school and high school there, and then I actually left for college to Eckerd College in St. Pete, and then came back to Gainesville and went to law school at UF.
Oh no, you're a lawyer.
Yes, I do have. I did practice law. So I was actually barred in Georgia. After graduating, I moved up to Atlanta and was barred there and was working in law before I transitioned into education. Mm-hmm. So I kind of took like a strange career path, I guess, a unique career path. I was not, I entered the workforce in 2007 after law school. I graduated in 2007, and it was just a very, I was lucky to have a job like going into the recession, but it was a very difficult, a lot of unhappy people, I feel like, and it just was not what I was really enjoying, and spent a couple of years practicing law, and then actually joined Teach for America. And that's how I transitioned into teaching. And I taught I've only taught in Title I schools. So I've taught in Title I schools and public schools, charter schools, public charter schools, and in a private school that was 100% grant funded that served only refugee students.
In North Carolina or in Georgia?
That was in Georgia, in Atlanta. And that was honestly my most enjoyable teaching experience. And
you see a direct impact with everything you do every minute of every day.
Yes, you see a direct, yes. The growth is really exponential when you have kids coming in with, we started our sixth graders really at a kindergarten curriculum, and we usually could grow them several years in 1 year. But also you do see a very big difference between how Americans view education sometimes and how someone who has never had an education or a formal education views education. And for me, it was a very stark difference after coming out of the Atlanta public school system. So eventually moved up here to North Carolina, and I worked in a charter school here for a few years, and then made my way to the Department of Public Instruction and worked under Dave Machado for, I guess, about 5 years before I was appointed to this position officially. So, yeah, that's kind of a synopsis.
Well, that's great. So you have a phenomenal educational background, and then you were trained by a fantastic head of the Office of Charter Schools to take the helm. Dave did a fantastic job. It was very good.
Absolutely.
So it's funny talking about different education. I grew up in the Philippines, and so went to all boys Catholic school.
Yeah.
And so when I came back to the U.S. to an all boys Catholic high school in California, it was my first day. I remember I raised my hand the teacher called on me, and I stood up at my desk and said, "Sir," because that's the only way you could respond there is you stand up and say, "Sir." And the looks on the faces I got from my peers were like, "Dude, what is the matter with you?"
Right.
but it was normal for me.
Yeah.
But I learned very quickly that there was a new normal, and don't do that again.
Right. That's funny. Well, I have a 9-year-old, and I've always been like a yes, ma'am kind of mom. And she tells me, she's like, nobody else says that, Mom. And I'm like, well, you say it.
Right. I mean,
you don't have to say it at school, but when you're at home, this is how we talk to each other.
Well, even our daughter, who's now 31 years ago, she was at high school, and my brother-in-law, we were visiting California, and my brother-in-law said something or asked her a question, and Mari said, "Well, yes, sir." And he looked at her, he said, "What'd you say?"
Right.
And she just said, "Oh, yes, sir." What? Why'd you call me sir? Because that's what I do. He wasn't. It's all how you're raised in so many ways, and that kind of opens the door to the challenges we face in education today.
Very true.
A lot of kids have very limited structure, and then they come into the school, and the teacher is expected to be parent, teacher, role model, whatever the case may be, fill in the blank. So what do you think, how do you think charter schools in particular kind of try to fill that void without filling the void, if you know what I'm saying, where it's, you have to have a balance of being able to educate the child, and for those that have nothing as a base, to kind of like do that, but without going too far.
Yeah, that's really hard. I think, to be honest, I think that discipline issues really were a driving factor for me to leave the classroom. I don't think, we hear a lot of reasons why teachers are leaving the classroom. And I think that for some reason, there's less of a, people don't want to talk about discipline issues that much. It's something that's like, for some reason, like taboo almost. As a teacher, I had very high expectations in terms of, achievement and in terms of discipline. And, that's just something I believe in. I think that every child can rise to those expectations if they're given those expectations. And I think that, one, that I'm not sure how much training teachers get in how to really manage and deal with the issues that they're seeing, we have in schools now where, you've got social media and, online, even when I was in the classroom, which was, 8 years now, we still had a lot of social media issues. I'm sure it's worse now. I wasn't in the classroom during COVID times. But we had the online bullying, we had all those sort of things, and trying to deal with those things when you haven't had proper training on really how to uphold high expectations. And
if we see the discipline that college students are learning now, if they bring that into the classroom, they're being taught to just disrupt and destroy their campus. So what's going to happen when they're teachers? Right.
Yeah. There's lots of, I think there's just this combination of factors. Teachers aren't getting the training they probably need. Something that I've seen in schools for sure, going to some of our struggling schools, is just you have to have a very cohesive framework in a school. And so I think the schools that are really the charter schools that are really succeeding the most with one having a strong and positive school culture, which kind of breeds this respect and discipline that leads to academic achievement. It's consistent, right? So the teachers are consistent. The expectations from the top down in the school leadership is consistent. My feeling, just kind of anecdotally and qualitatively, from being in schools, is that those schools that don't have that consistency really struggle. Because if you have one, and I felt this as a teacher, if you have one classroom that is really on point, has high expectations, doing what they need to do, and then they go to the classroom next door and there's no expectations, or the expectations are very different, it's very hard to maintain that every day. So yeah, I think, and then of course mental health issues are just, I serve on the whole child committee, and the mental health issues are very real and seem to be
A
increasing.
lot of it's coming from these little devices.
Right, exactly. And then teachers having to deal with that on top of it, and not perhaps having, support on
Right.
in schools or coming from the home is it's a lot to put onto a person who's working a lot for very little money.
And I think, G.K. Chesterton was so brilliant, and one of his quotes, which I'll brutalize now, I'm sure, but basically is, if you leave kids playing in a field and there's a cliff and there are dangers around, they'll just either go right in the middle or they'll go over the cliff. But if you put a fence around the field, they know the boundaries and they can flourish inside those boundaries.
Right.
To your point, it's just, if you have expectations, you have boundaries, you can excel a lot more than if you're running, free willy in the field.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And kids, I think, absolutely thrive on having expectations, right? Just as an adult in a, professional environment, right? If we have expectations, if we know what we're being, asked to do, it's much easier to thrive than just, being dropped somewhere and not knowing what you're supposed to be doing.
So to that point, what are you being asked to do? Because you've got 9 schools now?
210, yeah.
210. And with charter schools, they're all supposed to be independently operated. And the ultimate customer is the one that determines, if they don't put their child in the school, you don't get the revenue, which means you don't have your doors open. So the ultimate, test is whether people put their children in the school. But so to that point, it's a support mechanism, because that's always been the balance with that office. You've had some people in there that think they're the superintendent and the regulator. And actually, in some states, there are authorizers that are calling themselves operators. They've kind of gotten a little muddy in some places. Yeah. So that you have a difficult balance of providing the support to the schools. And, and frankly, there are some schools that do need some rather stringent or some talkings to, as it were, because it's just like any organization. So I'm just wondering if you could kind of just tell us your thoughts on how you maintain that balance of support versus quote unquote regulator.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's kind of that's constantly the balance we're trying to hold here.
Some schools do need it. They need to get their wrist slapped or get somebody in there to help them, or they need to shut down.
Right, absolutely. And, I think since taking this position as director, we've added some consultant roles to the office, which has been, very, very badly needed. And so we've restructured into 3 specific teams here. So we have the authorizing team, the accountability team, and then the external support team. And that's kind of how each of those teams has both of those functions, right? Like, they're both doing some type of accountability and some type of support. But I think that those 3 kind of teams really show what the meat of our work is. So we've got authorizing, where we have the application process. So something that I think, sometimes people don't really understand the scope of our work here, right? We start from the very beginning of, opening the application and creating the application for these boards to come in. So we, my Melanie Rackley, who's over applications, right? She's working with boards from all over the country who might be coming and saying, we want to start a charter school in North Carolina, or, people coming, especially more recently, we've had a lot of just inquiries from people that are interested in running remote schools or new management companies coming into the area. And so she's dealing with supporting all those folks that aren't technically schools yet. And then we get them into the ready to open process. And that's when we really start having, that process is really a lot of hand holding. I think that people kind of underestimate, especially people that are coming into it this is their first charter school, underestimate the work that's involved and the complexity. And, every time there's a new legislative, bill where it's, whether it's the Parents' Bill of Rights or something, we've got to train people to know, and a lot of times we're talking about boards that just have lay people, some educators perhaps, but it just might be completely new to them. So those are kind of the folks, like the boards that are coming in. So we work with all those boards, and then we've got our 210 operating schools. So it's a lot to manage. I think also there's a lot of different kind of pressures on the office in terms of, we want schools to be accountable to, being fiscally sound and to the taxpayers who fund public education and all of, those sort of things. And then also providing support to schools that might be struggling, whether it's, staffing challenges or, I think it's becoming harder to really have strong boards. It is such a hard
people don't understand, even I would say conservatively 75 to 80% of the people that sit on these boards do not understand their fiduciary obligations.
Right.
And the fact that they are operating a company that is managing a government contract and they are accountable, and there's a 7-year clawback. And I think a lot of people, if they knew the liability involved on a board, probably wouldn't be on one or be as flippant about being on them. So I can see where that's definitely an issue. To get the right people on the boards, I mean, even before you get into the operational aspects.
Right.
So running those boards in its own right would be a full-time department.
Right. And I mean, certainly a lot of what we do for the Ready to Open process is just, and now with so many schools delaying, those boards might be working with us, hand in hand for years. And it is certainly a lot. They have to, just trying to explain how the finance systems work here and how like ADM works and funding, I mean, that is a lot for someone who is new to the space.
I remember when we started and we first looked at the budget, and this was 27 years ago, I guess. And so we said, oh no, there was a reduction. And I looked at it, I said, well, wait a minute, the funding is 1.5% higher than it was last year. And so, but it was supposed to be 3%. That's a reduction. I said, well, no, actually it's an increase. No, that's not how we look at it in the public sector. It's like, well, wait a minute, that's not how it works.
Yes,
it's totally different. Your brain is totally different.
Yes, that is very true. It just is a lot. So we really try to, and with our external support team, we're really trying to, I want to be very cognizant of like, what are the greatest priorities, for our schools, and, understanding that my team has limited capacity. Right. So we've really moved away from doing like general PD, because we've got the EC department, we've got federal programs, we have these other departments who focus on those those expert areas. We are doing more of the, very focused charter, related things that kind of, and trying to do more kind of networking events like our lunch and learns or office hours where they can just come and actually just ask questions. That sort of support. And also I try to really just have an open door policy where people feel comfortable, calling the office and saying, hey, I don't really know how to handle this, and providing good guidance as opposed to being like, well, come out with a stick. Like you've done this wrong. Right. Like I think Dave was really good at that. And I learned a lot from him about, if you open that door, they come to you for guidance, like people are going to come to you with questions rather than waiting till they've dug themselves a hole and now they need help. Right.
Well, and that's one thing with Charter School Marketplace is the business aspect of it is so important, because you talk about the governance rather, and you talk about in the classroom and the administrative, but the other big, huge piece of it is the business aspect, because at the end of the day, you still have to run a business. You got to pay your bills. You got to get the building facilities. You got to get all that. And that's actually our purpose, is to try and help out, just to provide, like you're doing your networking, is really a networking platform for schools to come in and meet the contractors, meet the accountants, meet the auditors, meet the suppliers, and do it in a way that's not, to your point, the hard sell or being told what to do.
Mm-hmm.
You have an opportunity to see what other schools are doing with other suppliers focused on, and that's where we're putting that charter school report card out. So it will be online where the schools can grade the reporters, or pardon me, the suppliers. And actually, you'll find this interesting is the suppliers will be able to grade the schools.
Yeah, that's very, I mean, and it's definitely very much needed. We get inquiries quite often, hey, do you have like a list of these people, or do you recommend these people? And I have to, explain to people we're a state agency. I can't, I can't make recommendations. You can go to, there's different associations available to kind of help you. So this sort of thing is definitely needed, I think.
The fact that the suppliers are going to be able to grade the schools too.
Right. Absolutely.
It keeps everybody on their toes.
Right. Yes. And that's definitely something, I think the majority of charter schools are doing things right, but we certainly, especially with some of our closures, we run into those cases where it's like, there's still vendors that need to be paid. And, I don't have like a coffer I can say like, here, I'm going to, like that's, we try to direct the board to say, you need to pay out, you need to prioritize your debts when you're closing, but, we can't control that. And oftentimes there just is not enough money to pay who they need to pay.
Well, we were dealing with not an education related, but a foundation years ago. And we had a dispute with the foundation because they owed us money and some other things. And so I was in a meeting with the board chair and their executive director. And I was looking at the board chair and telling him, this is what you've got to do. These are your responsibilities. And he said, oh, no, you got to look at her. She's the director. I said, hey, buddy, you're the board chair.
Right.
It's you that I'm going after, not her.
Right.
And he kind of looked at me cross-eyed like, what? I said, no, that's you. And he really didn't understand that was his obligation.
Yes. Yeah, we have to reiterate that a lot in the beginning phases. Like this charter agreement goes to the board, right? Like your school leader will lead the school, but essentially you're hiring and firing that person.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people, that's kind of squishy. Now, how about, so we talked about opening schools. What are some of the things that you see that are challenges to opening new schools?
Okay. Well, the last couple of years have really been difficult for opening schools. This year we had 12 schools that were on our kind of our cohort to open in this upcoming fall. Now we're down to 3.
Nice.
So, and most of them, 2 of them have withdrawn, and then the rest of them are kind of rolling over into our 2025 cohort, which will be quite large. What I'm seeing primarily is facilities issues. So it's kind of a combination of factors. There's counties now that have different types of zoning and like sewer moratoriums or building, regulations that are just making it difficult. And then on top of it, it's just, as there's no startup funding, right, from the state, right? You'd have to get that from finance that or have a grant or something. And the cost of facilities right now is just very high. And then you add on the interest rates and things like that. And schools are really struggling to find something that they can afford. So I would say facilities. And then what happens with facilities is if you don't get your facility quick enough, you're going to lose kids because, unless you're in a county where maybe there's one charter school option, you're here in the triangle where you've got defense, right? I think I applied when my daughter was, going into kindergarten several years ago. I think I applied to maybe 20 charter schools. I think she got into one, the one she's in. I just kind of tossed my name in the hat to see where she could possibly, get into. And if you don't have your facility early enough, you're not going to get many parents that are going to be, like when I was doing, and I had to figure out, how far away is this from work? How far, how long is it going to take her to get to carpool or whatever those type of questions are. And when you don't have that facility locked down, your parents aren't going to be able to answer those questions. And most likely they're not going to be on board that first year, which is when you need them. And then the enrollment becomes an issue. So like the facilities and the enrollment really go hand in hand as like the two main problems, I would say, or main challenges.
So that kind of opens the door. You've got EMOs and CMOs, and more of them knocking on our doors in the state.
Yeah.
So if you are a school that wants to start, it's one of those things where should you approach an EMO or a CMO, but then how much control do the founders have as opposed to the management company, which I think is kind of a lot of the management companies, they are in control.
Right.
So I'm wondering if what opportunities might be out there for people that want to start a school that maybe have a less hands-on management company, or in some cases, like one of the people we've interviewed here, they actually come in and do the financing and find the site. So I think that's probably for somebody. We started out in a church and then in trailers and then got into the buildings.
Right.
But the market's different now because people expect, I need a building for 800 kids tomorrow.
Right.
The whole start with 5 kids and go into trailers model, I don't know how that's working today because everybody expects everything now.
Right. Yeah. And certainly, I think you could probably do that maybe in more of our like rural areas that have fewer charter schools, but certainly in the bigger areas that are, like Charlotte, we've seen a lot of closures there. It's,
right.
And you would expect with such a huge population that you wouldn't have enrollment issues, but we've definitely seen them, and
well, yeah, that's the marketplace. If you can't, right. if your food stinks, the restaurant's going to shut down.
Right. And, and a lot of them just, you've got these schools that have nice buildings and you know, to try to get a parent to come to like a complex of modulars or an old, strip mall, that will work if you've got a really strong program behind you. But if you're starting out and you don't have that, established yet, it makes it even harder. Yes, exactly. And I also think, I think with the whole management company thing, I think that the crux is really, for me, what I want to see is just that a board understands the relationship with the management company, right? I don't get into like the philosophical differences about like management companies. And, I think it's very, I hear a lot of things about charter schools and like the privatization of, education and things like that. And their education is a business, right? Like if you go into a Wake County school down the street here, every single item you see from the screens to the chairs to the textbooks, somebody's making money off of it, right? Like so I think that's kind of I don't really agree with that argument, right? What I want to see is that a board that is starting a charter school understands they are getting the charter agreement. They're in charge of that and hold the responsibility for that charter agreement, and that they understand the contract that they're going to enter with a management company, right? I don't want, unless someone above me tells me I need to make these calls, right? I don't really want my office weighing into what is and is not like, what are the positives and pros and cons of a management relationship. What I've seen in the past, where the problems lie, is that a board does not understand exactly what they're getting into, or they don't understand the ins and outs, and then that can become messy.
But it is true. It's if you want to start a school and then somebody maybe from another state comes in and puts $10 million out and hires people and does everything, and then all of a sudden you say, "Oh no, you need to do that differently."
Right.
Well, did you have $10 million to start a school?
Right.
That's kind of the catch-22 there. You have to understand on both sides.
Right. And as it gets more complex, the fact is a lot of management companies know how to run a school, right? And it's just, it is very hard for a group of lay people to come in and run schools now. It's just, it's different than it was in, 1998 or when a lot of the schools started.
Well, when we first started in 98 is when we started, the process was pretty simple.
Right.
And then if you had a list of regulations and it just regulatory creep, and then all of a sudden where you used to have one employee to manage certain functions, now you have 5.
Right. Just
to keep up with all the paperwork that you have to. And it's not just state, the federal government's requirements. You've got local, just even local health issues and facilities management. I mean, there are so many regulations
Yeah.
that over and above just trying to educate children. That's why it's not just like running a lemonade stand. You've got a lot
Right.
of your regulatory things that you have to comply with at local, state, and federal levels.
Yes. Yes. And it's constantly, I mean, we're constantly, debating in the office, like, okay, do we train them on school risk management? Do we train them on the lead testing? Like, there's so
Right.
much now that it's like, what do, like we want to educate our schools and make sure they're aware of everything, but it almost becomes like, wow, like we seem like the regulator because we're just relaying the information because we want them to be knowledgeable.
Years ago, when was founded the Alliance way back, and we had our first meeting with people that wanted to start a school. We probably had 120 people in the room. I rented a ballroom at a hotel, and so at the beginning, I said, "So how many people here want to start a charter school?" And they're all doing this. And then after I started laying it out, federal, state, local, just hammering them with what you're responsible for. At the end of the day, I said, "Okay, now raise your hands. How many people want to start a school?" Like 20.
Right.
It's just when people understood what was required of them,
Right.
they're like, "Oh my God, I am not doing this."
Right. Yes, it is a big job. Yes.
So you just gave the annual report on charter schools. Can you touch on that just a bit?
Yeah. So we do. This is just a report that's required to go to the General Assembly every year, and I would say two of the things that jump out to me really, I think last year there was a big report that came out, and North Carolina was either 4th or 5th in the nation for charter growth at like enrollment growth after since the pandemic. And we're now at about, I think, 145,000 students. So we're at 10% of the state's, enrollment for public schools. A huge number. And then since 2019, the enrollment has increased, I think it's about 25%. So just a huge increase since the pandemic. And I don't see that changing, to be honest. I think that a lot of parents are now more, after COVID, obviously they became more involved in just understanding what, options were out there. So I think that one, we're seeing, continued growth. And then two, we're seeing the demographics are mirroring, like getting closer and closer to mirroring our total, public school enrollment.
As it should.
Yes. And, we still see a fairly large gap with the Hispanic population. I think there's a lot of reasons, going into that. And also just the Hispanic population is growing, right, in the state a lot. So you see the increase in the traditional public schools, and you see a slight increase in charter schools, but that because so many are coming, the growth is.
Well, a lot of it is awareness too. They're being sent over to this path instead of to the other path, and probably as they get more familiar with the turf, they'll start shifting.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, well, I think it'll be interesting to continue to see just the growth, and hopefully, the economically disadvantaged population continues to grow in charter schools. So seeing, hopefully getting more funding for things like transportation and things that make it easier for, kids in lower income environments to access good charter schools is helpful. And yeah, I think it's, we've over 70% of charter schools met or exceeded growth. So yeah. So I also think that, I'm not a proponent of the 80-20% model for the school, the school grades. I think if we were to see more of the weight rather than 20% go towards growth, but like a more kind of 50-50 split or something more even, we'd see very few low performing schools. So to me, as a former teacher, the point is to grow your kids, right? And everybody knows, right. And if you look at the data, it's very obvious that the A to F system is highly correlated with affluence and with, certain types of, socioeconomic factors. So for me, I find it very positive that so many of our schools are growing their kids. And we have a new school improvement team in the office. You know, we obviously have limited human capacity, but we are really trying to work closely with our schools that are challenged academically to help them just kind of think through, you know, ways that they can maybe make changes in like small kind of steps towards more positive academic outcomes in their school.
Well, I mean, with Kim, she put in some systems, you know, again, too much of this is not a good thing, but there are certainly some online tools that
Right.
Kim used where she was seeing the growth that maybe wasn't reflected in the A through F.
Right. Absolutely.
So she was like, well, that's great. You have your report card, but these other metrics that we're using show that these kids are really growing and improving, and it may not correlate to the A through F. So I'm not an educator, but I just am, you know, hearing from what Kim said that what you're saying makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, I think that definitely Catherine Truitt did a lot to, you know, improve try to push kind of a reform of the school performance grade. I don't know exactly where that, you know, if the General Assembly will take up some of that. I'm not sure on that, but I do think in the future, hopefully it's something that is still part of the conversation in terms of how we grade schools and look at performance.
Well, we have gone 20% over what our regular timeline is. We've got a lot to talk about.
Yes.
So that just tells me that we need to talk more often so you can share with what's going on in the office, because you have so many different things going on and people need to know it. And have an open platform. Again, you have an open platform for people to call you, but stuff like this where somebody can look at, if they're on a plane or whatever the case is, they can see what's on your mind and what's going on in your office. So we'd love to have you more. And we'd love to have you at the summit that we're having in July. If you wouldn't, you know, if you could give a quick briefing there as well, that'd be fantastic.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you very much for doing this. We learned a lot about you. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you, and have a great week.
Great. You too. Thanks again. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.